All right. Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. The Security Council held an open meeting this morning on Ukraine. The Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Rosemary DiCarlo, noted that the war that was triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine is over 5 months old and shows no signs of ending. Instead, the fighting is intensifying. Ms. DiCarlo said that in the face of such a grim prospect, the agreement signed on the 22nd of July in Istanbul to facilitate the safe transportation of grain and foodstuffs from the Ukrainian ports of Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Yuzhny constitutes a beacon of hope for humanity, as the Secretary General put it. She added that the grain agreement is a sign that dialogue between the parties is possible in the search to ease human suffering. The UN is now making every effort to support the parties in operationalizing the initiative, starting with the inauguration of the Joint Coordination Center 2 days ago. Ms. DiCarlo stressed that avoiding incidents such as the recent strikes on Odessa and creating enabling conditions will be key for the initiative to succeed. It is therefore imperative that the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Türkiye work in partnership to effectively implement the agreement. Ms. DiCarlo added that as the conflict enters a more protracted phase, attention is increasingly turning to its longer-term humanitarian, recovery, reconstruction, and socioeconomic impact. As summer wanes, she said, the need for winterization planning is also becoming pressing. Regrettably, she added, political dialogue has virtually ground to a halt. Her full remarks have been shared with you. Also on Ukraine, this morning in a tweet, Usnat Lubrani, the UN resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator in the country, said that she is in Odessa today, together with G7 ambassadors and the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. Ms. Lubrani said that she is very hopeful for the movements of ships to take place soon, taking much-needed grain and related foodstuffs from Ukraine to countries that need them the most. She added that it was an honor to talk to President Zelensky and to reaffirm the UN support to Ukraine. As she is ending her assignment in Ukraine today, Ms. Lubrani said that her successor, Denise Brown, will take up her post tomorrow. The UN Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General and Humanitarian Coordinator for Afghanistan, Dr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov, strongly condemns this afternoon's atrocious attack at Kabul International Cricket Stadium, which has reportedly caused casualties among those attending the match. Numbers are not confirmed at this stage. Local hospitals have reported receiving many victims. Dr. Al-Akbarov, who was present at the stadium at the time of the attack to address the National Cricket Association, sends his sincere condolences to the families of the victims and those affected, and wishes the injured a speedy recovery. He calls for a thorough and transparent investigation with perpetrators brought to justice. We have an update from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Undersecretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, will arrive in the Democratic Republic of the Congo today. It will be an opportunity for him to take stock of the situation and to meet with national authorities. Mr. Lacroix will also express his solidarity with peacekeeping colleagues who are working in extremely difficult and volatile circumstances, as well as share his deepest condolences with the colleagues and friends of the Indian and Moroccan peacekeepers who lost their lives during the demonstrations. Mr. Lacroix will be accompanied on the visit by the military advisor, General Barami Diop, and UN Police Advisor Luis Carrillo. The overall situation is calm in Goma today, although threats of violence against our peacekeeping bases and personnel continue to circulate on social media. In Kiwanja, North Kivu, security forces prevented 2 attempts by demonstrators to breach the base. And in Nyamalima, northwest of Rutshuru, the armed forces of the DRC intervened to prevent an attack against the MONUSCO base and arrested youths carrying petrol bombs and stones. Our mission remains on high alert. And we also wish to acknowledge a government meeting yesterday on the attacks against MONUSCO that was chaired by the Prime Minister, and during which the participants called for calm and dialogue. We issued a note yesterday on developments in Iraq. In it, the Secretary General noted that freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are fundamental rights that must be respected at all times. The UN has consistently called for demonstrations in Iraq to be peaceful, and on the security services to exercise restraint. It is further incumbent upon all security actors to cooperate with the government of Iraq in its efforts to ensure peaceful assembly and the protection of all state institutions, diplomatic missions, and personnel in Iraq, and to deal with any verified security breaches in an effective and appropriate manner while guaranteeing full respect for human rights. The Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Joyce Msuya, wrapped up a 5-day visit to Türkiye today. In Gaziantep and Hatay, Ms. Msuya met with displaced Syrian women, as well as with humanitarian partners, UN staff, donors, and Turkish government authorities involved in the U.S. cross-border aid response. Ms. Msuya applauded the government of Türkiye for supporting humanitarian work and expressed appreciation to Türkiye, which is the world's largest refugee hosting country, for hosting 3.7 million refugees. As we have told you, 4.1 million people in northwest Syria rely on UN aid to meet their basic needs. Every month, we deliver food and other aid from Türkiye, reaching 2.4 million people in Syria. We are also hoping that there will be increased investment in early recovery and livelihood projects. The current cross-border authorization will expire in 6 months at the peak of winter if the Security Council does not grant an additional extension. While efforts are underway to increase the delivery of cross-line aid from Syria at present, such deliveries cannot replace the scope and scale of the cross-border operation. During her visit to the UN Transshipment Hub in Hatay, Ms. Msuya saw the rigorous monitoring process involved in the cross-border response, stressing how this mechanism is making a real difference. From Somalia, a group of senior humanitarian directors representing UN agencies and our partners wrapped up a visit yesterday to the country, where the threat of famine is looming, with more than 7 million people already facing acute food insecurity. The team met with people affected by the food insecurity, as well as aid workers in Baidoa in Southwest State and Bardere in Jubaland State. They saw the increasingly alarming situation in displacement sites, where large numbers of people continue to arrive due to lack of water and food, as well as conflict and insecurity. Women, children, and elderly people are bearing the brunt of the crisis, with a growing number of unaccompanied children among the displaced, and there being increased risks of gender-based violence in crowded displacement sites. More than 4 million drought-affected people have been reached with assistance, but humanitarian workers face mounting challenges, including insecurity and severe shortfalls in funding. So far, 62% of the nearly $1 billion required for life-saving drought response activities in Somalia has been received. Of the more than 7 million people who are acutely food insecure, more than 200,000 of them are experiencing catastrophic levels of food insecurity, and hundreds of thousands of young children are acutely malnourished. Across Somalia, northern Kenya, and southern and eastern Ethiopia, more than 21 million people are affected by the drought, following 4 consecutive failed rainy seasons. The failure of a 5th rainy season this autumn now looks increasingly likely. Funding is urgently needed to prevent a large-scale loss of life. In a report released today, the UN Refugee Agency said that protection services are severely lacking for refugees and migrants, making journeys from the Sahel and the Horn of Africa towards North Africa and Europe. The report provides tailored information for refugees and migrants on services that are currently available on the different routes. The report also highlights the gaps in available protection services, notably in shelter, access to justice, identification of survivors, and the provision of responses to gender-based violence, trafficking, and for unaccompanied and separated children. To support and assist survivors, UNHCR urges the introduction of community-based shelters and safe spaces, better access to legal services, and differentiated services for children and female survivors of trafficking and gender-based violence. The full report is available online. Tomorrow is the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, and this year's theme is Use and Abuse of Technology. In a message for the day, the Secretary General notes that human trafficking is a horrific crime and an all-out assault on people's rights, safety, and dignity. Tragically, he says, it is also a problem that is growing worse, especially for women and girls who represent the majority of detected trafficked persons globally. The Secretary General says that, as this year's theme reminds us, while technology can enable human trafficking, it can also be a critical tool in fighting it. He stresses that we need governments, regulators, businesses, and civil society joining forces to invest in policies, laws, and technology-based solutions that can identify and support victims, locate and punish perpetrators, and ensure a safe, open, and secure internet for all. The Secretary General calls on the world to give this issue the attention and action it deserves, and work to end the scourge of human trafficking once and for all. And tomorrow is also the International Day of Friendship. On Monday at 1:15 p.m., there will be a briefing by Ambassador Gustavo Slovinin of Argentina, President-designate of the 10th Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. After that, at around 2 p.m., there will be a briefing by Dr. Robert Floyd, the Executive Secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. And at 4 p.m., there will be a briefing by Ambassador Zhang Jun, the permanent representative of China and president of the Security Council for August. He will, of course, brief on the Council's program of work for the month of August. And with that, I'll turn to the floor for questions. Yes, Edie?
Thank you very much, Farhan. A couple of follow-up questions on the grain deal. Do you have any comment on the comments by Lloyd's List today that no insurers have really signed on yet because of outstanding issues still to be resolved? Why don't you start with that, because we know the president of Ukraine was in at the ports. I imagine there were hopes that what Mr. Griffiths said yesterday, that the first ships might go yesterday or today, were in his mind. So what's the holdup?
Well, on that, what I want to point out, first of all, the Joint Coordination Center is working to establish standard operating procedures, including monitoring and inspection procedures and emergency response procedures. The work also focuses on the routes and corridors for the inbound and outbound vessels. Once all of those elements are in place, then we will start seeing the first movements of ships. The ultimate goal is to ensure the safe passage of commercial vessels, and that should then relieve the sort of issues that insurers are talking about as well.
As a quick follow-up on that, is there a timetable for how long that's going to take?
Well, for me, the point is that we're first trying to make sure that all the policies and procedures are in the right space so that everyone who is going on these journeys can do so safely. So I don't want to be held to a day. As Mr. Griffiths pointed out to you yesterday, there are ships that are basically ready to go once the procedure's in place. It can happen fairly quickly after that. And once that happens, we'll certainly be sure to inform you of that. I'm hoping it can be soon, but I don't want to be held to a day.
And what's being done to help address the insurance issue?
Well, the entire point is to make sure that you actually do have a system where you can get from point A to point B with assurances of full safety. Once that happens, that should help address the sort of concerns that insurance companies are talking about. Okay, last one, because Celia's been waiting.
This is the last.
Okay, really last one. Okay.
Stephanie Williams is leaving on Sunday as the Secretary General's special advisor, who is going to be leading UN efforts to get the sides, the two different governments together and try and work on a political deal.
Well, we'll see. We're trying to, as soon as we can, to have at least an interim person named to do the sort of task that Stephanie Williams was doing, but I don't have anyone to name for you then. As you know, we do have a functioning UN support mission in Libya. The officer in charge of that mission is the same as it's been, which is Resadon Zenenga, and so he will continue to be the officer in charge until we can name someone else. Now, Celia.
I'd like to ask a question about Mali. Is the UN mission functioning at its, full time? Because many fear that the attack were provoked probably by soldiers hostile to the regime. What does the UN think, and how does it work now for the mission?
Certainly the mission is still is definitely going about its work as it normally does. Obviously, you're aware of the difficulties we faced, but at the same time, as you're aware, Jean-Pierre Lacroix was there. He only just left Mali in order to go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo just now. And during his travels, by the way, among other things, he did meet with Colonel Assimi Goïta and discussed the various concerns we have and the future prospects for the mission.
But do they know about the fact that Malian soldier might be hostile to the regime and try to make another coup?
We are doing all that we can, including working with the de facto authorities to make sure that there is stability and security in Mali. But of course, you will have seen that we've talked about the need for the democratic transition in Mali that had been arrested over the course of these last months to be respected, and we continue to hold to that point. James.
Yeah, I've got rather a lot of questions, but I'll do two on Ukraine first anyway. What does the UN know about an attack that has taken place in Donetsk on a prison in Olenevka, which has killed dozens of Ukrainian prisoners of war? Tell us what you know about it, because Russia and Ukraine are both blaming each other. As you're aware, I'm sure, the POWs in this prison include those who were taken out of Azovstal in that UN ICRC operation. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba is calling on the UN to go there to investigate the site and the ICRC to check all the prisoners of war. One assumes because the UN was the guarantor for that deal in Azovstal, and this is where the people ended up. So does the UN here have an obligation, a duty of care?
Well, we certainly would have our concerns about the mistreatment of prisoners, not just because of them being from Azovstal, but as a general rule. As far as that goes, we do not have any firsthand information at this point about what's happened there, but certainly we are concerned about this attack. Of course, I will leave it to our colleagues in the International Committee of the Red Cross, since the ICRC is the guardian of the Geneva Conventions, to comment on the applicable rules having to do with prisoners of war.
But will the UN, as the foreign minister, I'm sure, given he's the foreign minister of Ukraine, he will, it's in Russian-held territory, as I understand it, he would obviously facilitate it to a certain point. Will the UN try and visit the scene? Because you say you don't have first-hand facts. He's urging you to establish the first-hand facts.
Well, first we'd need to see what sort of request we'd have, and indeed what sort of mandate we would have for any exploration into this issue. This is early days, and we don't have anything of the sort. But of course, as you yourself pointed out, the question of access is also a difficult point. But we would strongly encourage all the parties on the ground to fully investigate what's happened.
And my other Ukraine question is about comments by the Deputy Ambassador of Russia, Ambassador Polyansky, in the Security Council. He talked about the port of Odessa and the deployment of military goods and hardware in the port. He said that's what they hit on the 23rd of July using Harpoon anti-ship rockets. He said the Harpoon anti-ship rockets supplied by the US were being stored there, and that's what was destroyed. And then he goes on, nothing in this memorandum, the one that was negotiated in Istanbul, prevents us from continuing to ensure the demilitarization of Ukraine. Do you agree with that reading of the memorandum, that they can continue to attack sites in Odessa? And what is your response to his comments?
I would just refer you back to the briefing that Rosemary DiCarlo just gave a couple of hours ago, in which she did mention this. And I would point out, along the things that she said, that one of her key points was that avoiding incidents such as the recent strikes on Odessa and creating enabling conditions will be key for our Black Sea Initiative to succeed. And I think I'll leave it at that. Yes, Pam.
Yes, some more questions on the Black Sea Initiative and the grain shipments. As a follow-up, on the logistics related to the shipments, what technology are you utilizing in the port to see where the mines are? There's been some analysis that mines may have shifted in 5 months. with tides, that the ability of these ships may not be able to discern where those mines are. How worried are you, and what do you have any kind of technology, since the mines were not extracted, right? Correct? Thank you.
Yes, as Mr. Griffiths explained, the
Right.
approach we're doing is not involving demining.
Right.
Rather, we are relying on the provision of agreed safe passages, and ultimately this is about coordination with the parties to ensure that the route across the seas will be safe. Like I said, one of the things that's being worked out right now are the standard operating procedures, including monitoring and inspection procedures and emergency response procedures. And all of that is designed to make sure that ships can travel safely. But that's being worked out with the parties. And ultimately, our counterparts from Ukraine and the Russian Federation are having to work to make sure that as much can be done to have a safe route established that does not take anyone through mined waters.
And I'm sorry, just as a follow-up, the UN has a great expertise in demining. Originally, the UN agreed with Ukraine that the ports did not need to be demined. Is it the UN opinion that these ports do not need to be demined?
Well, I'll just repeat what Martin Griffiths said yesterday. We are opting for this policy as a way of getting as quick action as we can on the movement of grains and foodstuffs, because our Mine Action Service calculated that it would take between 3 and 5 months to do a proper demining exercise.
But did they certify that it was safe?
What we are doing with the parties is establishing a safe corridor.
All right.
We're not going through waters that either the parties knows to be mined.
Thank you.
Yes.
Farhan, on Wednesday, Mr. Dieng said that they were bringing a doctor from Kinshasa to do autopsies on the peacekeepers and I guess some of the civilians who were killed in the protests in DRC to examine the bullets. Have those autopsies happened? When will you have forensic reports for us?
The process is underway. It's certainly not complete, but we'll try to provide updates about what happens with those investigations once we can get further information on them. Yes, Edward.
Okay, so I got a follow-up on the grain deal. Just like my colleagues pointed out about the mines, first, is the mining issue one of those technical issues that has to delay the procedure of the ships going out from Odessa? And second, just like you mentioned, it will take 3 to 5 months to do the demining. But do you have a plan B to at least demine, like, let's say, some of the areas adjacent to the corridor to make the corridor bigger to ensure the safety of passage?
I think yesterday Mr. Griffiths explained why demining is not one of those tasks that can be done partially. It needs to be done properly or some alternate method instead used. Right now we're using an alternate method, and we're doing what we can to make that method work.
And the second question is concerning Yemen. We know that the truce of Yemen would be expired next week. I believe it's 2nd of August.
Yes.
So I know there's talk about the extension of the truce. What's the latest update on this?
Hans Grunberg, our special envoy, is in touch with the parties, and he's trying to get as long an extension as possible. You'll have seen the statements we've shared from Mr. Grunberg with the press. He's arguing for a much longer extension, given what we've already seen have been the many accomplishments of the truce so far in terms of lowering the level of violence and restoring a sense of safety and security to people in Yemen for the first time in many, many years. So he is in touch, and we'll inform you about any results once we have those.
So he's trying to have a longer period of time rather than 2 months.
Ultimately, we believe that this truce has shown what can be achieved. And indeed, we've made accomplishments in terms of other aspects of making lives easier for the parties in terms of things involving the opening of roads and of airports. And we'll see whether we can get more accomplished with a longer truce still. Yes, Mariam.
Thanks, Farhan. U.S. delegation met with the Taliban about Afghanistan Central reversed money. There has been some concerns that this money is not going to be spent the right way, or also it's going to relax the pressure on the Taliban about women's rights in Afghanistan. Does this G has any opinion on that?
Does who?
The Secretary General.
Oh, I mean, ultimately, the transactions that different member states are having is up to them. But we have made clear what our concerns are about the Taliban and their need to respect basic rights and to live up to the commitments that they made themselves a year ago, as they first took de facto control over Kabul. Yes, Ephraim.
A question about the ship that apparently has arrived to one of Lebanon's ports, carrying thousands of tons of flour and barley. There seems to be some uncertainty as to where the ship came from and what's the source of the goods on board. Ukrainian embassy in Beirut says the ship or the flour on the ship was stolen. And the Lebanese authorities said that they received many Western complaints about the ship. Does the UN have any information about what is happening there?
No, we have no first-hand information, but ultimately it would be important for the governments where the ship is docked to look into these issues to make sure that anything is cleared up, that concerns are cleared up about the provenance of their goods. I'll turn to Michelle Nichols on the screen. Are you there? If not, I'll turn to Iftikhar. Iftikhar?
Thank you, Farhan. Regarding this unfortunate incident at Kabul Cricket Stadium, has anybody claimed responsibility for this attack?
No, at this stage, no one has claimed responsibility. As our humanitarian coordinator, Ramiz Al-Akbarov, said, this needs to be fully and thoroughly investigated.
Secondly, my question has been asked, but may I ask you whether the United States, which is having regular consultations and talks with Taliban, most recently in Tashkent, is the United States is keeping the UN briefed about the talks?
Well, we're in regular touch with all concerned parties on Afghanistan. I don't have any particular comment to make about the United States. Dulcie?
Thanks. So I just wanted to go back to the Black Sea and the mines. As far as the UN is concerned, does it know whether there are mines planted by Russia in the Black Sea port? Because there have been many conflicting reports about Russian mines in these waters.
It's always possible that either party has put mines down, but we're relying upon them because, of course, parties themselves are aware of where their mines are, and what we're relying upon is for them to combine their expertise with us. And so through the Joint Coordination Center, we're trying our best to make sure that we can devise the safest possible routes through the Black Sea.
And just one other question. You referred to something called emergency response systems.
Emergency response procedures, yes.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, if there's any sort of emergency that arises over the course of this, we want to make sure that there are response procedures in place to ensure the safety, again, of the ships going across the Black Sea. Celia and then James.
As a follow-up to a colleague, do we know will we know about the Italian diplomat? It's about investigation. Who was killed in the DRC? It was maybe 1 year ago. We
Yeah.
never know the outcome of those investigations. How
Yes.
come?
Well, we certainly have cooperated in terms of providing the information that we held on our side. Ultimately, the investigation is continuing with the local authorities.
After so long? I mean, does it take so long to investigate on a crime or on an attack?
I feel like some reporter asks me that question about every single investigation that happens.
Yeah, but I mean, we never
but
get
the
an
answer is,
answer.
if this is a question I keep getting, then yes, this happens quite a lot. Yes, James.
So first, a quick follow-up on Stephanie Williams. I mean, you didn't read out anything about Stephanie Williams. You just confirmed her leaving date. Does the SG have any comments about Stephanie Williams, who's arguably, in the last decade, been by far the most successful diplomat for the UN in Libya? She created a pathway to elections, even though the elections didn't happen. It seems that no one's paying tribute to her today.
Well, I certainly would like to pay tribute to her at this, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. She's been doing an amazing job. In fact, we at the United Nations were hoping that we could continue to extend her time longer than the end of July, but as it turns out, she does have other commitments, and so therefore there was always going to be an end point to her stay with us. Having said that, we're going to continue to look for a successor and to build on her accomplishments. And you're well aware of the tremendous amount of work she did to make sure that Libya would have unified institutions and that its bodies would work together. There continue to be hiccups in that effort, but she has done as much as anyone can do to try to resolve those.
Two other completely different questions. Myanmar. According to human rights investigators, the military in Myanmar is using fighter planes to fire unguided munitions into civilian areas. Do you have a reaction?
We've already made clear what our concerns already are about the situation in Myanmar, and this would simply add to the concerns about the sort of brutalities that are taking place under the current regime. And again, we emphasize our call for the restoration of the elected government and the release of all political prisoners, including Aung San Suu Kyi. Yes.
And DRC with a very different sort of subject. Licensing rights for 30 oil and gas blocks have gone up for auction in DRC. These are blocks in the peatland tropical forest, which environmentalists say will release large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. What's the UN's reaction?
Well, I wouldn't have a comment on actions that are having to do with the policies of the government with other governments and other commercial companies. That's outside of our purview.
Even if it's seriously endangering the environment, which is one of the SG's top priorities.
Well, you're well aware, and we've made this clear, not just to a country like the DRC, but to all the countries around the world, what our concerns are about the use of different natural resources, including those that involve the exploitation of fossil fuels. And those concerns apply. But we have no specific comment on this. Yes.
About the successor of Stephanie Williams, the name of Sabri Boukadoum has been circulated for quite some time now. I heard that 14 members of the Security Council are in favor of his name, but one member, the Emiratis, are against. Will the Secretary General listen to one member only, or will he announce that Mr. Boukadoum has been the successor? How does it work? 14 against 1.
The way it works is if there were to be an agreement on a candidate, I would be able to announce it. I have nothing to announce for you. Therefore, at this point, there's no agreement. And on that cheerful note, I will leave off from you, and you will get to see my comrade Stefan Dujarric on Monday.